Hey everyone, welcome in. I'm Andrew Lucio. This is Kyle Waple, and with us today is Stephen Pierce. And today we're going to be talking about deck construction, theory crafting, and everything else. Welcome to the local game store training grounds. Let's get it. All right, so today we're going to be talking about deck construction. We're going to go over all the particulars, and we're going to kind of bounce back and forth and use our own experiences. Steven has been playing Magic the Gathering for a very long time, so he's going to bring us some good viewpoints and kind of translate some of those things for some of y'all transitioning from Magic the Gathering over to this game in particular, Flesh and Blood. And then, of course, Kyle can jump in and help us out with Yu-Gi-Oh! Transition, Pokemon Transition, Dragon Ball Super. Between the three of us, we played everything, and we'll try to piece it together for you and make it as basic as possible. So let's start at the beginning and work our way from there. The basics of deck construction in this game in particular are that you have 80 total cards for your deck. And those 80 cards are going to be in one single list. This is going to include your equipment. This is going to include your attack action cards, your non-attack actions, and everything else in between. You're going to have a core of 60 that you're going to need to present, minimum 60, to your opponent. And from there, it's going to be based on how you build, what you're trying to gain from your deck in particular, and then what you need to sideboard out and transition between matches. And we'll talk a little bit about sideboarding after we kind of get through the nuts and bolts of the deck construction. So let's begin with the hero, because I think starting with your hero is pretty much where you really need to begin. And effectively, in my opinion, your hero is going to be the basis of your foundation for your whole entire deck and what you're going to do with that deck. So, Steven, from your experience, with all the limited play that you've done and everything else in between, point out a hero, use one as a specific example, and then give us an idea of how you would theory craft and build around that hero, that whatever hero you want to point out, based on what that hero's ability is.
Okay, so for a limited environment, which is what a lot of us are preparing for the callings that are coming up.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking at Briar, you're primarily trying to get your one non-attack action, your attack action, so that you can then swing with the Rosetta Thorn afterwards and guarantee the 2 arcane damage. Since, the arcane damage is, for the most part unblockable, you're just guaranteeing that you get that 2 in every turn. So one of the things you want to do with your hero is be consistent, and in that situation for Briar, that is how you are being consistent, is you're just putting in that damage constantly. So whenever it comes to deck construction, you want to make sure that you have the right balance of non-attacks and attacks so that you can push through that damage or, make a big swing and then get the little chip damage in. It's all about trying to maximize the effect of your cards based on what your hero is trying to do. The benefit of Briar is even whenever you get the chip damage in, you get the embodiments of Earth, and you're able to defend a whole lot easier than any of the other heroes can really do in this limited format, which makes it a very interesting environment in that Briar can kind of get 2 cards in one most of the time.
So looking at the model that you've just developed there, one attack action, one non-attack action, one attack action, and then being able to swing the weapon, go again, action points, all those things are going to be very important in order to make the deck very consistent. But color ratios are also going to determine how far you can extend that turn.
Oh, yeah.
So, Kyle, based on your experience with Prism specifically, when you're looking at color ratios for Prism, what are the things that you're looking at? Individual pieces of equipment, individual attack cards, your hero's ability. What are you looking at, and what color cost ratios are you trying to achieve within the deck? Specifically, if you don't know this, for Flesh and Blood, you have blues, which give you 3 resources when you pitch them, yellows, which give you 2 resources when you pitch them, and red, which gives you 1 resource. That's just context for you, but go ahead.
Well, for Prism, she has her weapon, the Luminaris, which is going to give all of your attacks go again as long as you get yellow in the pitch zone. So because everything's pitching for 2, we're generally going to always be looking at cards that cost 2 or effects that cost 2. And that's why things like Pummel or Command and Conquer just so easily fit in the deck outside of all of Prism's cards as they are, which are already 2 costs. Prism ends up leaning a lot more towards the yellow count with a bit of on the blue side because our equipment can give us extra resources, allowing us to play like our auras that just cost 4 or 6.
Okay. So equipment makeup, when you're looking at things inside of the scope of limited, you have a lot of common pieces. You're not really going to see a lot of legendaries. Mm-hmm. But when we look at the transitioning from the limited format over to classic constructed, we're going to be pulling from 4 major sets, 1 little mini set with Crucible, and we're going to have access to all these different pieces. Using Briar as a specific example, what kind of equipment changes are these players going to see coming from limited formats to classic construction, where certain pieces might be better than others when you're actually building that full 80 card classic constructed deck?
Yeah, so the key difference there is what are the equipment trying to do in limited and what are they trying to do in constructed. In limited, you're trying to make your mediocre cards good, so you're going to have cards like Deep Blue or your Cracker Jacks that are trying to empower your cards to give you more oomph, basically. Yeah. But in constructed, you actually get to design your equipment, like the Shock Charmer, for instance, with Briar. You can design that in such a way that whenever you're getting your swings in, you can use Shock Charmer to just get that little bit extra. Mm-hmm. And so what you're doing is you're taking, a piece of your deck that you're guaranteed to have and giving your cards an extra effect that they otherwise wouldn't have. So you're increasing the efficiency of your card rather than trying to bring up a medium card into a passable card.
So looking at the go wide strategy, which some Briar decks will try to do, depending upon how you're doing that strategy, Grasp of the Arcanite, for example, which is a Runeblade glove, it's a legendary, comes from Arcane Rising, correct? Yep. So when you look at those types of strategies where you want to make sure that you have a full 4-card hand, a 2-block with Battle Worn that could potentially come a 3 damage mitigation over time, does that feed better into a strategy like that? Is that something that you may end up choosing, or is it something that you just might include, and depending upon the matchup, you may sideboard in or out that card?
Yeah, so it's entirely going to be matchup dependent, and the main way you're going to figure that out is just by playing the game over and over again, and trying to work in, okay, like Shock Charmer is able to do this amount of damage over the course of the game, Grasp of the Arcanite is able to do this amount of damage, but also save me this much health, and you just try and weigh that versus which heroes you're going up against, and you can kind of figure out, okay, I think in general, Grasp of the Arcanite might not be as powerful as Shock Charmer, but in this specific matchup is like hands down the better pick for whatever that reason may be. And the nice thing is you have that flexibility with the sideboard of, even if you find out that Grasp of the Arcanite isn't as effective, you can just slot in a different card or maybe change out your headpiece and go from there. It's a nice thing about constructed.
Now, before we get too deep dived into what the sideboard actually is and how to construct that as part of the full 80 package, let's talk a little bit about card selection as it pertains to theory crafting. So using Prism as a specific example, Prism's main hero ability is an instant ability that can operate on your opponent's turn or on your turn. You can pay 2 and you can create a shield. Now, shields by themselves, in essence, they're damage prevention. Damage prevention means that effects, 2-hit effects, will not go off if they're calculated correctly, if they're defended correctly, and that kind of allows the deck to be very defensive in the idea that that's what Prism is trying to do. But also, because of Luminaris, all of these auras, all of these shields, they're also offense as well. So as you're building up defense, you're also building up offense, and you're able to transition back and forth between those 2 modes. So when you're doing your card selection, Kyle, specifically for Prism, with the idea that this is her ability and kind of theory crafting that out, what cards are you looking for to feed into that ability to make it synergize, to make it really work? And then what other cards do you include that may not necessarily fit in with specifically what Prism is trying to do, that give you value?
I mean, for the most part, we're just picking cards that are going to be really hard to block, that can just get into our soul so that we can use her ability to play and defend out. So usually the red 7s are going to be the ones that are really difficult in all levels of play, because you got to commit 3 cards or 2 cards in an equipment, and that's where the equipment really comes in with the defending. Usually outside of Prism's ability, we don't really do too much. It's usually all on the plan, because we just want to do big things.
There's going to be a lot of different heroes for you to choose from. The first 2 sets were 4 and 4. Then we moved into Monarch, which gave us 4, and then of course now we're in Tales of Aria, where we get 3 more. So what you're looking at overall is a 15 hero selection. And then of course, if you go into Blitz or if you do it into limited formats, that's going to open up some other avenues with different heroes as well. But the central idea behind theory crafting is to select cards that feed into an overall strategy where they synergize really, really well, either by the cost that they're synergizing with. So for example, if you're playing Bravo and you're on Anathos, you want to make sure sure you have a lot of 3 cost or higher cards so you can turn Anathos on when you need to. Or if you're playing on the Brute plane, you want to make sure that you have a lot of 6 or higher damage cards so that way you can intimidate consistently and make those intimidates work for you really well by limiting your opponent's lines of defensive play. So theory crafting is very important, and it's going to help you decide what cards to put in the deck. And then based on the cards that you put in the deck, i.e. how much they're going to cost on average, that's going to determine what your color ratios are going to be, whether you have a lot of blues, whether you have a lot of yellows, or whether you have a lot of reds. Now, we're going to talk a little bit now and kind of deep dive into sideboarding and how that measures up against building the whole 80-card picture. Remember this, you've got your 60-card core. This is what you're going to present to your opponent. Now, every single opponent's not always going to be playing the same hero. So there are going to be cards in your deck that are just not as effective against that particular hero, and this is the essence of what sideboarding is. So remember this if you remember anything else when it comes to building your sideboard. I'm putting cards in my sideboard that answer the weaknesses in my deck against certain heroes. And who are these heroes that we need to be building against? Well, those are the heroes that are in the meta. Steven, walk us through specifically what the meta is, how it's defined when you're building your deck, and what you should be doing when building your sideboard when it comes to your deck specifically. And you can use any hero as an example.
Yeah, sure. So I have the most experience with Prism. I'm relatively new to the game, so I'm going to try and go from her perspective, and I'm sure Kyle can hop in here with some more professional level experience. But yeah, so I think as far as the metas go, it really depends on what you're looking to play in. So like if we're playing in a local tournament, for instance, like we had a lot of chain around here, and with some Katsu or Dash, and you can kind of fix your deck around those 3 heroes in this instance. Or if you're going to like a road to nationals, you might need to be a little bit more flexible. Mm-hmm. Make sure that you're able to have a plan for Kano, for Bravo, for Dorinthia, and along with the 3 others that we've already mentioned. And it's important whenever you're going into your sideboard to try and find the cards that have the most overlap between effectiveness and the strategies.
Yep.
And so that's a fairly tricky thing to do, and one of the ways that I really like to approach that, or at least that's what I've done with Magic and what I will do for Flesh and Blood, is you play with what are essentially like flip cards. So what I mean by that is you have a card in your deck that you're not sure if you want it to be in your sideboard or in your main deck, and you basically have a second card in place of it as well. So whenever you draw the card, you can pick, all right, like I want this to be a Wartune Herald, or let's say something like wild, like Invigorate or something in Prism. And so you can go, all right, in this instance, I drew the card, Invigorate's better here, or Wartune Herald is better here. And you just kind of look at how many times like Wartune comes up as being the better card, and you might move that to your main deck, and you might have the other card be your sideboard, or you might take the other card just completely out of your sideboard and like work in something else. So using those flip cards is a nice way to evaluate potential answers to different matches that you come across.
Now, specifically when it comes to equipment, we're going to have our 60 card, and then most people, we'll use Prism as an example, are going to have 5 pieces of equipment that are going to be their base. How much of the other 15 cards does equipment play a part into what you put into your sideboard, and when would you swap out equipment based on those particular matchups?
So for Prism, all of her pieces really play into our plan. The thing we can take out is usually our gloves, which we take out for a No Rune glove. And we play No Rune because there's just, Arcane is just unstoppable without being able to have Arcane Barrier. So, classes like Viscera and Kano and now Briar, they're just these classes that just do this magic damage that we just need to stop, because if we don't stop it, it just turns on their other abilities.
So specifically what you're thinking about then is when we're building that sideboard, we want to make sure that we're addressing the shortcomings of our particular deck against whatever we feel are the best decks in the meta that we're at. And the meta is determined by the location. If it's your local, then if everyone's playing, Rhinar, then you need to figure out what's going to work best against Rhinar. And those are the cards that need to make up or shore up your weaknesses. So whether that is specific to your color ratios, 6 blues coming out, 6 blues going in, whether that's specific to defense cards. So, for example, a lot of the Tales of Aria element cards, those are 2 blocks. Maybe 6 2 blocks are coming out and 6 3 blocks are coming in, or cards that can't block are coming out and cards that can block are going in. Whatever the ratio may be as far as equipment goes or anything else, your sideboard, those specific 20 cards, the whole makeup of that, or the 15 specific besides your 5 pieces of equipment, on average, those are the cards you need to be thinking about where you're traveling and what you think you're going to see and what you're weakest against. Because at the end of the day, when you play this game, you're going to flip your hero, you're going to decide who goes first, and then you're going to sideboard. And when you sideboard, you need to take out cards that are not good against your opponent and bring in cards that are going to give you a better chance. Now, your deck may not be the most efficient, and it may not be the deck that is winning consistently, but at the end of the day, this is your hobby, and you want to enjoy your games. And so the only way that I can help you enjoy your game better, or we can help you enjoy your game better, is for you to shore up your weaknesses as best you can, so that way you don't feel like the match is so one-sided. Does that make sense? I hope it really does. Now, we talked about sideboarding, we talked about the theory crafting, we talked about the full makeup of an 80-card deck. We're going into Nationals. Let's talk a little bit about the meta so we can help, hopefully, potentially, help the people that are watching this build a better sideboard. So what do you think the meta is going into Nationals? What do you think the top 3 decks are, the decks that you really need to be focused on?
So I think that a lot of people are going to be experimenting going into Nationals, and they're going to either bring something that's a little unexpected, so for instance, Chain even after the nerfs, or they might try and do something like Q with Briar, which I think she has some pretty strong builds in and of herself. So I think that it's really just going to come down to what you're most familiar with is probably what you should play, and whenever you're trying to approach the other decks, you kind of want to be prepared for some spice, and then your traditional sideboards that you've already been prepping. I don't really think it's going to change too much. You just need to kind of understand that some people are going to come with a unique thing that you need to be able to adapt to.
Okay, so well let's try to get a little specific. All right, let's say, in your opinion, let's say that Prism is number 1.
Right.
So what do they need to include in their sideboard that's going to help them against Prism?
So they're probably going to want to have attacks that can pop Phantasm. Like that's going to be the biggest way to kind of
6 or higher attacks.
Exactly. You're trying to steal the momentum from Prism. Yes, they have Phantasmal Footsteps, but if you're able to, take a 6 attack that maybe has like 2 or 3 block and turn that into oh no, this damage is stopped, like that's really good for you because you're not taking the big hits. So ideally, if you're going against Prism, you want to have the big sideboard attacks that can also just attack Prism cleanly too, for the most part, or like a Turn Timbers or something, which can just completely take the full hit. So you're just trying to be flexible with what you got in your sideboard.
All right, so kind of going off the idea that Prism's going to be number 1, which I think there's going to be a significant amount of Prism when we get to Nationals. The thing you need to think about in your sideboard is how can I get action points? And what are those cards? What do they look like? And what can I do with that? If you can swap out your foot, I would highly suggest in your sideboard you find space for Time Skippers because that's going to help you out. But remember, that's blue intensive. You're going to need to go for a 1-for-1 on that and leave a 3-card hand or hopefully a 4 with a card in arsenal so you can regain that momentum using those 2 action points. And you're also going to want to take a look at cards like Lead the Charge. And if you're working within the essence of Lightning, then you can also take a look at Flash for the Go Again specifically. You'll try to push Go Again for damage and then swing Weapon or something else at your auras so that way Spectra will kill it, but you'll be able to get some momentum back from pushing against your opponent. All right, so looking at Prism, what's your highest recommendation? Just generally cards that that can help certain heroes get back in the game or that are annoying to you as a Prism player.
So, any way you can gain action points is always good. Command and Conquer is extremely popular. The card's pretty much good against any deck, but having a 6 that blocks 3 to just sprinkle into your deck against Prism, it's like it sucks when you block with it and it sucks when you swing with it. Either way, it's an annoying card to deal with. Outside of that, that's more or less. You don't need to get too many 6s outside of that. Just.
What do you think a good transition piece is? 3, 6, 6 6s?
I think if you hit 6, you're probably fine in the matchup. Some decks can go over, and they feel a lot better for it. Viscera and Bolton, they're like these decks that can just play like 9, and it sucks.
All right, so Prism's number 1, number 2. I feel that this might be the time to start looking at Viscera. Viscera feels really strong. What are some strong sideboard options against Viscera other than Null Rune, of course? What do you feel like would really shut down what Viscera is trying to do?
I feel like you probably bring in like some defense reactions. I feel like when they hit you with the specialization to make a bunch of rune chants, you don't want to just eat it and just let them get all that, like basically use all their rune chants and then just make that many more. So you're like, a defense reaction and a block from hand can usually stop most of that. That feels pretty good.
And give you some context on that, a lot of what Viscera is trying to do is a version of what we would call a one-turn kill. So effectively what Viscera is trying to do is build up rune chants, and when they build those rune chants are going to pop on an attack action card or a normal attack with their weapon. Now when they do this, what they're trying to do is they're trying to lead in or buff an attack called Arcanite Ascension, which is effectively going to be free because it's reduced by 1 for every single rune chant that's on the board. So what Kyle's trying to point out here is if you're arsenaling or have access to where you can more readily arsenal defense reactions, then you're going to be able to block more damage, which means Arcanite Ascension is not going to create more rune chants, or you're going to take less damage from that coming in. Now, coupled with your null runes, obviously you'll be able to stop and mitigate some of that arcane damage, because remember, each rune chant is an individual source, so Arcane Barrier 1 is going to be totally fine for that matchup. And with that being said, though, they're still coming in for some considerable amounts of damage.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so if it's Oath of the Arcanite with a +3, they're coming in for 8. If it's Slogism, they're coming in for 10. And based on the turn, they can actually come in for a little bit more. There are some double Slogism turns where they can come in for 15. It feels pretty nasty, but you think about the card makeup. Remember, when you're building a deck, you're building on a 4-card hand. Everything in the game is 4 cards. So if I've got Arcanite Ascension in the arsenal and I've got 15 rune chants over here, I can go pitch a blue, play a Slogism, pitch a blue, play a Slogism, come in for 15. That feels kind of bad, but it'll feel less bad if you're arsenaling those defense reactions, which I think is actually a really good call. I would also say, and Steven, you can back me up on this, I would also say that gaining health in that matchup would slow down their progression, but there are going to always be other cards that you could pull in, such as Rally the Rear Guard, which is a card you can play down, pitch, discard for, instant, gain more. And then there's another one that came out of Crucible. It's an instant that actually just gives straight defense value to attack action cards. And I think we even see one of those in Tales of Aria as well, right? Yeah. There's an Earth card that does that?
Yeah, it's an Earth instant that gives +4, 3, or 2, depending on red, yellow, or blue.
Yeah, so in those particular situations when you're dealing with Dominate, and that Dominate can be translated to Bravo, can be translated to Oldham, it can be translated to the Lexi builds that we might see when we're going into Nationals. Anything with Dominate, or if you have an idea that the person you're playing could have heavy Dominate, those are sideboard options that could help you shore up your defenses against those things. But specifically with Viscera, as we're going into Nationals, I think those cards are going to be pretty important. So now let's say the third real big threat, and I think this is a very static one, is going to be Bravo. So if we're going against Bravo, we're doing a lot of Dominate. What are your sideboard recommendations?
So for Prism, which is the main perspective that I have there, I would mainly be looking to shift how I'm attacking Bravo, because we're going to try and, well, Bravo's going to try and hit me pretty big, and I want to try and put out a bunch of auras to kind of mitigate that damage so that I can defend and then still ping him.
So front-loading your defense.
Exactly. And so for me, I would like really prioritize the aura sideboard option for Prism and just try and shift over that as hard as I could.
So there's a lot of ways to front load defense, even if you're not playing Prism. You're looking at cards, and I know that you don't like this card, but there is a card that comes out, I think it's out of Arcane Rising, and I think it's called Enchanting Lullaby. You pay 2, it has go again, but you can front load this defense, so that way the next time you would take an attack, the red prevents 4, the yellow prevents 3, and the blue prevents 2. So front loading your defense, if a card can actually fit in with the grand scope of what you're trying to do, is another way that you can mitigate some of these Dominate builds and things like that. Sigils of Solace, things that gain you health back, so you can take an 8, but then you can get 3 back because you couldn't commit more defense and things of those nature. Those are things that are also going to feed into that plan. that's pretty much all there really is to it, right? I mean, like, you need to be able to front load your defense against decks like that, and I feel like Bravo's going to be one of those things. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I think both Guardians are really insane going into into this meta.
Absolutely. Well, let's kind of recap it just a little bit, and then we're going to go ahead and cut off for this time. So at the end of the day, here's what you're doing when you're building your deck. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to look at your hero. Choose a hero that you like, and then start building around it. The second thing you're going to do is theory craft. That's basically looking at your hero's ability and picking and choosing cards that are going to feed into that. Once you've chosen the cards that you want as your core, then you got to look at how much they cost, and you got to make sure that when you're pulling a 4-card hand, you're going to be able to sequence and pay for it. So when you look at this card, it's really, really good, but it costs you 5. Well, then what do you need in your hand to play that? You need a blue, you need a yellow. If you had 2 blues, that'd be 6, you'd be 1 over. Maybe this 4th card could be a 1-cost buff. And maybe this could be a 0-cost buff. But the point is, when you look at your costs, you got to start looking at your total accumulation of resources and how that's going to balance within the deck. So if your 60-card deck, maybe you go 30 blue to make sure that when you draw your 4-card hand, you have a 50% chance of drawing that blue, so you can sequence out these bigger turns. You need to look at your weapon, and you need to look at your equipment that you're going to play and make sure that those things feed into your overall strategy as well. Because on turns where you don't have enough cards to do something to your opponent, can your weapon swing big enough to apply enough pressure that you're able to try to get back into the game? That's going to be important as well. And if you look at, for example, with Bravo and Anathos, if your weapon says if I have multiple 3s in the pitch, I get +2 damage, well, then you need to also take that into account as you're choosing and selecting all those cards. And then when you start looking at the full 80 package, take your 5 equipment pieces, put them to the side, take your 60-card core, put that to the side, and those 15 cards that you have left over to make out your whole 80, you need to start looking at the cards, not the heroes that are going to be the most devastating to your deck. What's in your meta, i.e. where are you going, where are you playing, and what are you going to see, and then use those 15 slots to address the weaknesses in your deck versus those specific heroes. Now, do we have any parting words before we leave?
Just make sure you're having fun.
Remember this is the Kyle Waple response. You know what's fun? Winning.
Hell yeah.
Again, I'm Andrew Lucio, Kyle Waple, Stephen Pierce. We appreciate you watching. We hope it was good for you, good for us. The next show that we're going to do is going to be a show on drafting. I know drafting is really important for a lot of people. I'm going to share with you some of the things I've learned. Stephen's going to join me for that show, and we're going to kind of go over some really good particulars. And we appreciate you tuning in, and we'll see you next time. Peace.